Welcome to the new Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news on the local Colorado economy and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host, Chris Gorog, brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. Chris is personable and opens up with our guests on issues we all would like to see addressed. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's new Cyber Frontier.
Well, welcome back to the new Cyber Frontier. Our guest today is James Schollard, who is a cloud solutions architect at Elavon, a global technology solutions wholly owned subsidiary from US Bank. Hey, welcome, James.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so what exactly is a cloud solutions architect? Can you give us a little bit about your background and how you came to be where you're at today?
Yeah, so I actually joined the United States Army Infantry when I was 19. Ended up becoming a communications officer for an infantry rifle company. Went to the 5th Special Forces Group Combat Communications School, and I've been doing some sort of communications work in some form or another ever since. After the first elections in Iraq from 2004 to 2005, I came back, got my degree in computer networking, my first degree, and just entered the workforce. I've worked for government. I worked for Maxim Magazine. I ran all their websites for a year. I've worked for fintech startups, the company that invented coupons on credit cards. So as soon as you buy something and it qualifies, you get money back immediately. And now I work for a big bank. So I've been doing consulting work in the cloud space for about 10 years. This is my first full-time permanent engagement in the last 10 years. Got a little bit tired of trying to sell myself like a used car every 6 to 12 months. So it's kind of nice to have a permanent home now. Enterprise solutions architecture at Elavon is kind of an awesome thing to be in. We don't per se have a job. We just float around and help people, right? So there are a large number of regulatory and compliance, documentation processes, et cetera, approvals that all need to be captured, and somebody needs to be able to reference them, right? So we have some pretty complicated processes for creating a change, adding an application, developing a new toy. So my group actually works with the product teams at Elavon to kind of chaperone them through the process of negotiating all the paperwork, getting the approvals, et cetera. But our secondary kind of passive mission is that within the organization, we get to see everything. And so we identify things that we don't like. And we know that no one's going to give us $5 million to go fix a bunch of stuff. So we actually use the projects and product line efforts that are funded and in process to guide the organization towards a ideal future state where we want to be going forward, to just make everything better as a whole for the organization.
All right. Well, so US Bank, I mean, what's that? That's one of the top 5, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's 4. I'm not quite sure. It's a incredibly large and complicated organization. Elavon's a pretty small entity compared to the bank as a whole. So, we're looking at hundreds of people on our side, and we work with thousands of people over there. So it's coming into the organization is quite a task to figure out who your touch points are, who your stakeholders are, especially from an architecture perspective, because you end up putting your hands in so many different things. So it took about a year and a half to figure out exactly who to talk to and whose responsibilities were what. So as we're making the journey into cloud and solidifying our place in different public and private cloud technologies, we've had quite a bit of transition as well within the internal team. So it's been a little bit of a challenge, but we keep moving forward and we're making good progress. So it's we're in a better place than we were last year.
Okay, we're going to stop and take a short break for our sponsor.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
Welcome back to the New Cyber Frontier. Our guest today is James Schollard, who's a cloud solutions architect from Elavon, a global technology solutions company owned by U.S. Bank, one of the big dogs out in the financial industry. James, one of the things you mentioned is you've spent about 10 years in the cloud architecture space. What kind of challenges have you had to deal with and understand, and where has that brought you today? I think you said that you're going through a cloud migration with U.S. Bank right now, which has had its own unique challenges. What are your thoughts on that?
So if I may, I'll offer, a lot of people ask, what is the cloud? And over time, I've developed my own definition, if you're ready for it.
Sure.
It's someone else's computer that they let you control, right? So from a security standpoint, that scares the hell out of people, right? Because it's not my computer, but I get to control it, and I have to put my data on it, right? So we've seen over the past 10 years as cloud has come into vogue, right? And it's actually started becoming usable. 10 years ago, we had Amazon. We used it with Eucalyptus, right? So it was kind of a data center hybrid burst model where we could spin up additional capacity and then shut it off on demand, which was pretty cool. Now it's grown to the point to where the core infrastructure services from each IaaS provider, they all have little nuances and caveats, but they follow prescribed usage patterns. We can orchestrate those with things like Terraform, et cetera. But the big thing is trying to map back our physical controls for things that we have under lock and key, and trying to show how the logical separation and logical controls are as good or even better in many cases than what we're used to. So that's been one of the big challenges is, if VMware is in my subnet, right, I don't have security groups necessarily, right, but it's in my building, it's behind my lock, right, I have my security guards there. That's a big shift when you move to a public cloud provider. One of the hardest things, and I'm glad the bank set down the mandate, is to try and remain provider agnostic and still be able to satisfy all these controls. So when we look at data loss prevention in Azure, we can use something like Sky-High, right? It doesn't cost that much for Azure because they charge by the account and by the storage bucket, right? The account cost is pretty high, but you only have one account, and then you have subscriptions under that account in Azure, right? But when we go to Amazon, we'll go buy a company and just take over their account. We have to repurchase Sky-High every time. So, there's a lot of tooling caveats and things. There's also been quite a bit of difficulty with wanting to stay comfortable with things that we've already purchased for our data center that make a lot of sense to pay a lot of money for when they're a hardware appliance. But then when we convert them over to a software or virtual appliance, the cost no longer makes sense, right? When we look at something like a F5 virtual load balancer that costs $20,000, that doesn't make any sense when the infrastructure provider gives me a free load balancer, right?
Right.
Things like checkpoint firewall clusters, they're extremely expensive. Imperva firewalls, WAFs, things like that. So The challenge is to be able to put it into a framework where we don't have to leave a large number of people behind in the organization. They can still contribute, but we still have the controls in place to make sure that legacy designs and legacy decisions don't derail the project or drive it into a cost overrun. Right.
So what about the communication back with the organization that you're providing the solution for? How does the conversation go with the board? How receptive are they to, the solutions that you guys recommend, and how do you articulate that risk in business terms so you get that buy-in you need for successful implementation?
Yeah, the primary thing that we try to focus on are capabilities, so comparison of apples to apples whenever possible, right? So when we say, okay, I can use EC2 or Azure Compute or Google Compute, right? And it provides this set of features and automation. A big one that we like to use as a selling point is auto scaling, right? So there's a large number of features that are required for auto scaling, right? You have to have a load balancing orchestratable API, right? You've got to have some sort of an orchestrator. You've got to have it integrated with a monitoring solution. You've got to have a compute service that can respond on demand and add or remove capacity and make changes. If you look at what that takes to build that in the data center, sometimes some organizations, you could be waiting 30 days for a virtual machine, right? Depending on what the paperwork and finance and all that it entails, right? We've got it down significantly lower than that, but it's hard to say that I can auto scale. So what we've always done is we've had to over provision, which costs a lot more money, right? We say, what is the maximum possible amount of utilization that I should ever have to pay for? And then I just have to request that on day one and continue to pay for that. So showing that we have capabilities that can save cost, increase resiliency, and actually being able to demonstrate the new levels of controls. Security groups is a huge seller, right? Network ACLs on virtual networks like VXLAN networks is another big seller. So it's important to be able to show the extra levels of controls that we put in. I'm a big fan of actually creating documents that say, okay, well, this is what my bare metal security looked like years ago. And I have a firewall running on every OS, right? And then I have a firewall on the network to VMware, right? So I've got additional controls to cloud, right? I've got even more up to and including, now security groups or stateful firewalls on every instance, right? The trouble that we have is there are so many new gadgets and so many cool things and so many options that it's easy for people who are tasked with solving things to get pulled in by a vendor and go off on a tangent, right? Again, the bank offered the agnostic strategy, and that's actually helped kind of keep us out of the weeds so that we don't specialize on this cool, shiny new thing in Amazon or Google, and then aren't able to even create environments in another deployment zone without completely reworking everything. So the bank actually adopted Terraform from HashiCorp. It's actually let us standardize our deployments to where I can say, okay, give me a load balancer. Provider is Amazon. Provider is Azure. And we've abstracted everything away so that we don't necessarily care what the provider is. But then when we come back to the data center, we can show that we're missing a bunch of things that can drive the roadmap for maturity in those areas.
Okay, that's awesome. One of the things that we think about when we talk about big banks like US Bank is the requirement for high availability. How do you guys address that issue?
So our public cloud providers actually help us out with that. So I don't want to give away the architecture here, but we are absolutely required to have redundancy replication. The old style of saying, okay, well, I'm going to build a data center and I'm going to have this AT&T circuit. And if that goes down, I have another data center. We get a huge benefit from having things like availability or upgrade or failover zones in public cloud providers. The awesome thing that we're able to do now, since we're beginning to automate all of our deployments and environments, is we can actually take advantage of cold sites, DR sites better, just by replicating data to other regions. And then, within an SLA, we can have Terraform automation or Cloudify or Juju kick off an entire region build to bring that system up, and then we can just reconcile the records on the back end. So spinning up multiple data centers live all the time is no longer as required as it was. Also, being agnostic and trying to stay agnostic means that we have, and we're on the cusp of, but we will have and be using the capability to move an environment that's in Amazon, say it's in London. I can move to Azure in Europe instead of just having to go to another AWS region when Amazon might be the only provider having problems. So that's really cool.
Oh, that's awesome. We're going to take a short break for our sponsor.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
So welcome back, New Cyber Frontier, Shawn Murray. Our guest today is James Schollard, security cloud solutions architect at Elavon. We've been talking about cloud, the lessons learned going into cloud, cloud solutions, scalability, redundancy, the capability of an organization to be agnostic. One of the things that we were talking about earlier, James, was PCI DSS and some challenges that you've had for scalability there. Do you want to hit on that a little?
Yeah, so we, like any large organization, we have the government guidelines, right? So we have SOX, we have PCI DSS, we have et cetera, right? And they say in some vague way that you need to protect this by doing something like that, right? And you always end up having some sort of a policy that you have to create that says, okay, to accomplish 3.2.6, right, we will implement this one control, right? So then when we go into the new world and we've had these policies that don't change very much over the years, and then we completely rip out everything that those policies were built to run on, we end up finding that we have a lot of challenges, and we end up having to identify the core spirit of the regulation and having to debate on what the policy was actually meant to achieve in order to relate it back to these new technologies. So I know Amazon actually published a paper meant for the Department of Defense not long ago about the physical segmentation requirements and dedicated hardware, where they spoke at length about what that was meant to achieve and how logical segmentation achieves that, in the hopes that the Department of Defense wouldn't require every single group to be on its own single hardware, right? Single tenancy. Just talking on that regulation, the intent is if I do something illegal and the FBI has to come and confiscate the gear, how do they do that without exposing someone else's equipment or someone else's data to the FBI that they're not entitled to, right? So you actually have to walk it back all the way to the logic of what you're actually trying to achieve. And for a lot of policies and procedures and things that have been in place in a larger organization for a long, long time, it's a big challenge. So it takes a little bit of work, and you got to make sure you have everything in order before you go tackle one of those, right?
Yeah, I mean, so for an organization the size of yours, it's one of those things that can be cumbersome if you don't have a good roadmap on how you're going to get there.
Right.
A highly regulated industry like banking and finance, you're exposed to that every single day.
Oh yeah, yeah, and the everybody wants our data, right? So we actually serve ourselves pretty well by being paranoid, but it can backfire on us as well, right? So we in some cases we try to even prevent ourselves from being able to do things we need to do. So in 2019, now that we have Puppet, Chef, Terraform, all these cool gadgets, right? We can actually take humans out, right? And humans have bad days. Humans get tired. Humans get angry. Robots don't, right? So when we look at the easiest way to solve this, and especially when it comes to a highly regulated industry, and especially the separation of duties component, we know that whatever any developer writes goes into a source code repository, and it gets checked off, and somehow that can get into production, and that's considered secure, right? So let's just do that with everything. So let's do that with network, infrastructure, hardware, everything, right? And that has saved us on a lot of those discussions, and having to have those discussions by just taking humans out, right? We've worked with Amazon, Microsoft. Microsoft's actually been extremely helpful in helping us through this transition. And, we've worked closely with our partners to establish those roles and responsibilities and make sure that we're always honoring the spirit, and we're not going to break anything or expose anything accidentally.
So I heard Microsoft is helping you through that construct. So are those unique Microsoft tools that integrate into their policy management, Active Directory components?
No. So when we go back to agnostic, we say, okay, well, I'm not gonna put all my migration, compliance, et cetera, on a Microsoft specific cloud component. I might buy software that I could run anywhere from Microsoft, right? What they do, and actually I kind of have a brief synopsis of the three major public cloud providers, right? So there's Google is just there. Like, they have capacity. If you want to buy it, cool. If not, they don't care, right? Amazon is all the bells and whistles, all the cool tech gadgets, all the stuff that just came out. And then Microsoft are the guys that really want you to come over and really want you to stay, because they need you, right? So of the three, Microsoft has been the most helpful in working through the transition with us. But they're always behind Amazon on features, right? So when we take a look at container platforms, we use the EC2 container service. We love Kubernetes, right? It's amazing. It's beautiful. It's this incredible little machine, but we don't make any money by being good at it, right? Like, US Bank is not going to revolutionize the Kubernetes industry and be able to actually profit on that. So we don't care about Kubernetes. We just want to run containers, right? So when we take a look at things like that, we develop a pattern that we can use across different providers. And, that helps us make our decisions as to which things we actually want to get into and which things we don't think are ready or don't fit the ideal pattern. To that end, just using Microsoft's core tooling and getting fully in bed with them, it can help with the initial loadout. But if there's ever any reason why you don't want to use Microsoft, it actually increases the burdens of being able to be portable and be reactive. So as we look at agile transformation, we like to reduce the number of dependencies as much as possible without having to build everything ourselves, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. That kind of hints on another topic. So with a lot of work that you're doing, do you have any DevOps projects that, you're working on?
Yeah, essentially the entire organization is a new DevOps project that we're working on, right? Um, there's a major transition underway to get product teams and business lines to work in a more agile method. I cringe because I heard someone say the agile waterfall method one time. Right. So, but it's a sign that it's a transition, right? And we're focusing more on reporting, accountability, right? Breaking things down into small pieces. And honestly, a lot of our success in moving to the cloud has been because we decided that we need a minimum viable product, not the final waterfall type solution, right? And, we've actually gotten all the stakeholders across the organization to agree that we're just going to iterate because we don't know the answer today, right? So that's been a huge thing to get buy-in and actually make progress. As an organization, we're used to, and like I said, we're very paranoid because we want to protect our customers and everybody wants their data, right? So we are used to having to solve the entire problem of building all the pyramids at one time. And then it takes us forever to go find bricks, right? So it's allowed us to be a little bit more flexible. And the new thing that's amazing in the organization that we've introduced here in the last year or so is that it's okay to fail sometimes. So, we've actually been putting things in place to make it so that the cost of failure is not catastrophic and that we can actually try things and they can fail and we're okay with that. So that makes us better, and then it keeps us from being locked into things that end up being a terrible product later because we thought we knew everything on the first go around, right?
Well, that makes more sense. The whole traditional concept truly of DevOps is, in the dev environment, be as creative as you want, as you can be, meeting the requirements of those stakeholders. When you do move to test, you can only, test in that environment as you intend to for prod. Building, the function of failure into it, helps you understand where the weaknesses are so that you can better construct something moving forward, a true DevOps environment.
Yeah.
How do you handle risk in build security into that environment?
So we spend a lot of time on risk. And in fact, even things that aren't directly related to risk still end up with the word risk in them to get attention a lot of times. But we obsess over it constantly. We actually have individuals whose job it is, their only job is to try and figure out ways to break our security and then come back to us with questions as to how I'm going to stop them from doing that, right? It's a constant activity. Every change is a new thing that can bring new challenges. I'd say that we have a lot of really smart people that do a really good job and they're very good at their jobs. But the largest problem that we have with the sheer volume of new technologies and things that come out every day almost is training and trying to keep people up to speed with that. So we spend a lot of time sending people to, we go to meetup groups and local events and conferences and anything that we can get into. And, we try to foster that in the organization just to keep people immersed in it, because really the immersion and just the constant exposure is the only thing that makes it comfortable. And, when somebody has to make a decision and it has to be quick, being fully comfortable and just, having a general understanding of the full lay of the land is the only way to actually make those decisions without having to kick off a giant project, right?
Yeah, that sounds absolutely optimal. I don't know how everybody, achieves that or gets there. So where do you see your organization or what's the future look like next, let's say 3 to 5 years?
3 to 5 years, I see our organization having the capability to start contributing and working with open source projects. We don't actually have any capability to contribute to open source projects now, which kind of excludes us from being part of those communities and being part of actually creating innovations that are specific to our needs, right? I know when I worked for AT&T, we built their AT&T integrated cloud platform. They created their own OpenStack from scratch. And the only way they were able to do that was to basically push everybody into the project teams for whatever their component assignments were, compute, storage, whatever, and make them, just have them participate in the actual development of cloud platforms, right? It goes back to the immersion. I would like to see us move towards that in the near future. And I think, we have a lot of talented people, and I think we could actually make some really good contributions that would actually be enjoyed and accepted by the community. I know a lot of organizations start contributing to open source and build a lot of things that nobody else will ever use. I won't name any names, but you see a lot of things get rejected in open source projects from enterprise funded efforts, especially from like the major technology providers. They like to build little lock-ins and things that are specific to some problem that only they have, and the communities always reject those. So I'd like to see us get a little bit closer in line. We also have a hard time dealing with new vendors. As a again, highly regulated institution, we have to keep track of third-party vendors, right? We have to make sure that we're not buying switches from terrorists and, hiring scammers to do development on core systems and things like that, right? But what it turns into, if it's not controlled and constantly evaluated, is a situation where we have a list of these 20 vendors, and if they don't sell what you need, then you just have to go write it. Whereas somebody else probably has a pretty cool solution that can probably save you a lot of time and a lot of money. But, if it takes 6 months to 2 years to get the vendor in, that doesn't fit your project timeline, right? So that's another thing I'd like to see us to be able to work on, is to be able to streamline those processes and be a little bit more effective and efficient. Elavon is a little bit more technical than the bank. It's been explained that we're a tugboat and the bank is an oil tanker. So we can change directions pretty fast, but it takes the bank a long time, right? The bank's been making great strides towards becoming a little bit more nimble. They're doing a great job. A lot of effort's been put into that. But yeah, I like where we're going. In 5 years, I think it's going to be a complete digital transformation of everything we do.
Yeah, you know what, I agree. And, organizations like yours are one of those contributors who will be, doing a follow-up, say maybe a year from now. We'll get you back on and see where things are at. Well, yeah. James, we really appreciate your contributions to the new cyber frontier. Our guest today has been James Schollard, Cloud Solutions Architect from Elavon, a global technology solutions provider for U.S. Bank. Thanks so much for contributing to our program today, James.
Thank you very much. I had a good time. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, you have a great day.
You too. Thanks.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of New Cyber Frontier. Remember to get involved. Often we think that someone else will handle privacy and security in the virtual world, but you are the only one truly in command of your virtual fate. Join our mailing list so we can keep you informed of breaking news and new releases. If you have an idea, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered, or if you want to get involved with our efforts, reach out to us at newcyberfrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors' links, as they are the ones that really make this show possible. I want to thank each of you for supporting the show, and we look forward to seeing you back for the next episode of New Cyber Frontier.